Welcome to another episode of The Underknown. I'm your host, Jan Perillo, and today's guest is Dan Mangan. Dan is probably a singer-songwriter that should not be on a show called The Underknown. He is actually better known in Canada than he is throughout the rest of the world, but that shouldn't be the case. He is very, very talented, and he's a really good guy. I think that you're going to like this episode. We talk about a lot for the better part of an hour. I tried to delve into his past, into his career, into even his childhood, and I missed a lot. We didn't even talk about Dan saying no to Dave Grohl being on drums for one of his songs, which must be a great story, and I didn't even get to it. But we got to a lot, and I hope you enjoy the episode. We're going to go into the interview with a song called Melody off of Dan's latest album called Natural Light, and I hope that you enjoy the interview.
Melody chose me, and Melody changed her mind. I should be over it now, but I ain't over it now. That's why I'd rather be lonely than be somebody's wasted time. I should be over it now, but I ain't over it now. They all's gotta go and you want them to stay, so it's better not to love in case it's taken away. Right?
Dan, it's great to meet you. Thanks for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Dan, your new album is called Natural Light, and the song we were just listening to on the intro called Melody really struck me as, it was just something that resonated with me. And I've listened to it a bunch more times since I first listened to it, and it has a lot of depth to it. Actually, the whole album has a lot of depth to it. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the title, Natural Light. Because when I think about natural light, I think about something raw and unfiltered. And after reading how you recorded this album, it was really organic, and it kind of came up almost like a surprise. And I wanted to know if the name of the album, did it come after you recorded it in that cabin in Canada, or what? I mean, how did it come about?
Yeah, it's actually a bit of a story. The initial title for this album was going to be called Contained Free. And there's a whole backstory about why that was. Had to do with sort of the philosophy around the recording. I wanted it to be contained together, humans in a room, using the same gear, using the same instruments, the same everything. But I wanted to feel not contained when it comes to creativity. I wanted we could kind of go in any direction at any time, and not thinking about the radio, not thinking about, streaming, not thinking about who it's for, just pure joy, pure fun. And the third word was direct. In that I wanted these songs. These were kind of songs, like acoustic guitar songs. I wanted the songs to not be obscured by the music. I didn't want to try and make them so unsinger-songwritery that they, all of a sudden relied on the trick of the production. And so, kind of coming out of the session, we thought we would call it Contained Free. And we sent it to Arts and Crafts, the label, and they, spent some time with it. And they were like, oh, this is a great record. Really excited about this. Not sure about the title. It feels a little academic or cerebral or something like that. Not very inviting. And I was kind of bummed because, once you've made your mind up on a decision, you kind of close the door on that. And you're like, oh, good. There's relief. I don't have to make that decision anymore. But they reopened the door, and I'm like, jerks, And there's always like a part of me that's sort of like, why are these suits meddling in my creative?
Yeah.
In the end, they were totally on point. And I'm really glad that they said that, because I went upstairs after having our phone meeting, and I was going to get in the shower. I turned off the light and I cracked the blinds in the bathroom. And I just thought to myself, I prefer to bathe in natural light. You can apply some Shakespearean, I prefer to bathe in natural light. And just as I thought those words, I was like, natural light, And I remember that we recorded this whole album at my bassist's cabin in Ontario. And there's this big window that, there's lots of photos of this online, but there's a big window that faces the trees and the lake. And I just remember as we walked in, it was the middle of the day, and the natural light was just beaming in, into that room. And so natural light was sort of flooding into the room the whole time that we were there recording. And it made tons of sense. And, when I think of natural light, I think of, like if sunlight's coming through the window, and you can kind of see, because it's creating so much illumination, you can see the little bits of dust particles kind of floating.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this album feels like those little dust particles floating. It's like there's something serene, there's something ethereal, something kind of magical and raw, and also something like, I would hope that good music illuminates or like unlocks hidden truths. And I think that that's an interesting thing, because you're looking at these dust particles going, I'm breathing that stuff in all the time. I had no idea. And, whatever is the most ubiquitous thing around you is the hardest thing to see. And I hope that good music can sort of, bring some of that stuff to light.
It's interesting. So I thought about it a little bit. Like, I mean, it's really interesting the way that you came up with the album, but, or the title, because when I think of a natural light, you're coming at it from inside, which is really where people say, oh, this is natural light, as opposed to, from a light bulb. But I always think about it like being in the woods, shadows and then the light peeking through and like the natural light. And so I kind of feel like it's like this like unfiltered or raw, like these places of beauty that you can find out there. Yeah. And so when I watched a bit of you recording this album in the, from just the Instagram and YouTube posts that you did, it has this sort of like DIY feel in a way, right? That, like you said, you're contained in a room. You have a guy there with a computer essentially, and it looks like he's got his like production stuff there. I don't know if it's one of your band members or if you actually brought in a producer.
Yeah, that's Jason. Okay. Yeah.
And it just feels like it's just something that happened, natural, like, just unfiltered, raw. And that's kind of what I thought of when I heard the title.
Yeah, there was no one else with it. It was just the four of us. And we honestly thought we would maybe do some demoing, or what have you. But we mostly just wanted to hang out. We've been playing music live together on tour for 7-8 years. And I just like, it was just bizarre that we'd never been in the studio together. I'd been working with some fancy American producers and fancy American session musicians in LA. And that was an incredible experience too. And I'm really proud of those records, but it was sort of like, we spent all this time together. We're best buds. Like, why have we never recorded? And we honestly went there not thinking, let's make a record. We just went there thinking we'd hang out, maybe, work on some songs. But intentionally, we went in with no expectations of what we were going to leave with. And, the label was not expecting us to make a record. Nobody was. I had studio dates booked later that summer down in LA that I subsequently canceled. Because just as soon as we got there, I played them the first song that I just written a couple days before that I was really excited about. It Might Be Raining. And we just did like 3 quick takes, and we were like, oh my God, like we found, like, there's something that happens in the studio. You have to find the song, like you've written it and you kind of know what it is. But then as you're recording it, like there's always a thing that sinks into place, and you're like, or it doesn't. And that's terrifying. And you're like, oh, there it is. That's it. That's the essence of that song. That's the image. That's the North Star of what that should feel like. And we found it right away. And then the next morning we just kept going. I had 13 songs kind of up my sleeve, voice memos recorded on my phone basically. And it was just got faster and faster. Day 2, we recorded 2 songs. Day 3, 3 songs. Day 4, 4 songs. It just like, it was like this fever dream of recording. And I can't, I feel like I'm worried that I'm going to oversell this record because I'm so excited. I'm so enthusiastic. I'm so, sort of exuberant talking about it. I feel like I can kind of do that because I don't feel a big sense of ownership over it. Obviously, these are my songs. This is my record. It's my name. But I just feel like it was this sort of cool summer camp experience that I got to participate in. And wow, at the end of it, the most miraculous special album I think I've ever made.
Which is amazing. I mean, you've made 7 full-length albums, a bunch of like EPs, some soundtracks and things like that. I mean, you've made a lot. So to say that about an album, and maybe it's because it was so unexpected to you to come out of there with an album. Like you didn't have the expectation of what this session was going to be necessarily, other than a bunch of people, gathered together having fun and, experimenting, writing music, playing music. But you didn't expect to get an album out of it, I don't think.
Totally. And I mean, that's just the way, isn't it? Like the philosophy. I mean, I'm not practicing Buddhist or anything, but like, I think that there is some Buddhism in there in terms of like, when you detach yourself from a result, all of a sudden the process becomes even more special and ephemeral and sort of spontaneous, real and honest. And that truly was how it all felt. And yeah, like as you say, this is not my first go around. Seventh record. I think there's also part of the reason I'm so excited about it is like it, at the end of American Beauty, there's that line where he says, it's amazing. It's an amazing thing when you realize you can still surprise yourself. Yeah. And he's, going through this sort of like reawakening. And I know that Kevin Spacey is sort of off the table as somebody we can talk about anymore, but it is a good movie and it is a good script. He's not a good guy, but it's like, I feel that way at 42. This industry is obsessed with youth. You could get an agent or someone in the industry banging on your door, so excited. Oh my God, like I've discovered you. I can't wait to work with you. We got to do this. Yeah. And then if like 6 months later, things haven't exploded, they've moved on to something else. Right. Like it's so, everybody's swinging for the fences. Everybody's trying to find the next Billie Eilish or Chappell Rowan or Bon Iver. And there's an element to it that is just so like, what have you done for me lately? And, the idea of developing artists for long-term careers is sort of, it's just not part of the game anymore. Yeah. And so it's truly incumbent upon the artist to just persevere and just to keep going. And, I've been fortunate, and particularly in Canada, I've got a bit more of a following, and I've had a really cool career. I've got really great stories. I've played with huge bands. Yeah. I've met lots of celebrities. I've done cool things. I've played late night TV, and I met Will and Kate, like there's all these cool things that I've done. And yet in the scope of like major label acts, I'm like an unknown act. Right. Like I'm like a baby band. And I think that part of it is sort of like you have to maintain this gratitude for what's coming your way. And also like, there's a hunger under there of like, I'm a hungry guy. Like I'm ambitious. I want things. And I want to make better and better and better and better art. Like I don't want to rest on my laurels. I just want to keep trying to get better at this. And so I think that what I'm getting at with all this is that at 42, to me, it is a miracle. And I'm just so thankful that this experience happened now. And that on my 7th album, I feel like, and I've made lots of albums that I think are really great, right, and I'm very proud of them. But there is something about this record that feels like new territory to me.
You mentioned the art or the practice of bringing artists up. And I think it's something really important that, you talk about, if you think about what I have heard it was like in the 70s, if you got a record deal, you get like 4 record deals or something like that. It's like, and okay, your first one wasn't great, but let's see what we can do for the second one and the third one. Because most people don't start off as brilliant singers, songwriters, brilliant bands, brilliant, create the greatest record. And when you don't have a chance to develop that through any time, I mean, it's like, and when you're always just moving on and trying to find the next person that has a hit, like Billie Eilish happened to have, I don't know how much she threw out ahead of time, but she happened to explode onto the scene. Lorde did it, a bunch of years ago. Mm-hmm. But it was those first songs that they released that would just like blew up. I mean, Justin Bieber
Ocean Eyes.
Yeah, exactly. And so, what would have happened if Billie Eilish's first songs were, more pedestrian, right? Like maybe you can see something in them, but they weren't hits. Does that mean no one's going to follow? And it probably does mean no one's going to follow her, but then those people move on and they move on. And I think it's really, it is something that we've lost. And, as our culture gets more and more instant gratification oriented and short attention span that,
Yeah. I mean, have you ever had the experience of hearing a song online or something and being like, oh my God, that's amazing. Whoa, I'm blown away by that. And literally the next day, you can't even remember the name of the person.
Oh yeah,
or what the name of the song was.
Oh my God, always.
Like we're so attuned to that now. I think it's like there's a different length to cycles, and not just album cycles, but just like algorithmic zeitgeist cycles. I think that back in the day, because you had to like slowly break a band through a bunch of gatekeepers and barriers that were entrenched, and there's no other way around them. You had to like convince if you were from the UK, you had to convince UK radio to play you, and then you had to convince the UK distributors, and the UK is yada, yada, yada. And then, wow, okay, that's working. Okay, let's work on Germany. Okay, now let's work on the US.
Right.
And like, back even in the 90s, you could release an album and then release it like 18 months later in a different territory, and it would be a new album.
Yeah.
And I think that back then it took longer to know whether something was going to be a flop or not. And now, because the metrics are so available and data is so readily available, and Spotify and streaming, et cetera, has sort of made everything quantifiable. That there's less interest in qualitative response and there's more interest in quantitative response. A few things come up here. One is that the kind of art that explodes on social media is not really the kind of art that I grew up loving.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's not like 8-second tidbits with a crazy drop and then you match a thing to it in the video. And like the idea of like thinking about writing a song for social media, a lot of artists do that. Like a lot of artists are planning their songwriting around what they think will work. And my question is like, what is the end here? Is the end fame? Is the end, followers? Is the end a respected body of work that stands the test of time? What is the North Star? And I think increasingly within our particular zeitgeist, there's less and less and less room for the artists that are going for that long career arc. And there is, more and more and more space being taken up by artists that are willing to kind of just play the game of making music. I'm also not getting down on new songwriters. There's a lot of amazing songwriters, a lot of amazing new artists that are doing interesting stuff. But it is something to consider, I just see it. I see it all the time. I see a songwriter posting a thing and they're singing it in a particular way. And I'm like, everything about this was engineered for content purposes.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
But it's hard, even, so someone like, I want to talk about your earlier work at some point here as well, but you have this body of work that, like you said, you're proud of your other albums as well. And I imagine that some of them have a closer spot to you, but you've developed in a way, like very organically. I think you kind of come from this in-between time when, you still started before everything with social media. And so you had this real emotional connection with the fans that you've developed and you've brought up or brought with you. A lot of them seem to have come with you and some of them have come on for the ride later. But you mentioned something that I think is missing in a little bit in today's music. It's the kind of this concept of an album, and like I grew up listening to albums. I mean, we're both going to sound like we're old here. Like, well, I grew up in it when I was a kid, but it's true. Like there was something really satisfying about sitting down, putting on vinyl, or even putting in a cassette tape and listening to it and kind of having that tactile response, but having more than just
once you
one
bought
song.
it, you had to spend time with it. Like if you spent money on it, on buying a CD or a cassette tape, and let's say the first time you listened to it, you weren't that enthralled, but you would listen to it 4 or 5 more times because you'd spent money on it already. And it was the only thing in your car. And every time it gets to the end, it starts over again. So you're just like,
You're totally right. Yeah, I mean, and that's a great point. And one of the things about Natural Light is it feels like an album. You have one song in there that kind of like, or it's more than one song, but one struck me where it's like an interlude, and I forget what you call the interlude, but it's between two songs. And if you're not paying attention, it's almost like those 3 songs almost become one because there's this like, and that's, if I just listen to one of the songs, I can listen to just one of the songs, but you wrote it, presumably to be this kind of piece as opposed to just this bite-sized, nugget of a song. You built it to be within the context of an album, which is building and going somewhere, and you're actually, having a listening experience. And I imagine you're trying to balance having individual songs with having an entire album, having an entire piece of work when you're writing something like that.
Yeah. I think some of it is probably intentional, but a lot of it just is sort of happenstance of how it was made, and by the end of these 6 days in the cabin, we had a sequence, we had overlaps, we had a title, which ended up not being the final title. We had an album cover, which was a photo that Jason took during the evening when we were there. We had a photo for the back cover. And it all felt like happy accidents, one after another. The final night that we were there, we took this sort of like mock sequence which is very, very similar timing wise to what we ended up using for the actual master. And we sat and we played cards and we had beers and we, ate, and we just sort of listened back to what we had made. And we were like kind of weepy, like it was just like a tender moment, going like, what just happened? It was like we just sort of all woke up from a fever dream. It was like, we blacked out and we woke up at this table going like, God, what was that week? That was crazy. And there was this sort of sense of excitement. And I've said this before, but like, it kind of felt like we'd made Rumors, by Fleetwood Mac. Right. It was like we'd made a classic album that feels like an album that is like a moment in time. And that's how it felt to us in that moment. And the excitement was palpable. And what's cool is that if you look at the streaming numbers on Natural Light, there's obviously some peaks, because some of these songs were released early. Yeah. Some of these songs get focused attention from the label. But by and large, the difference in plays between the final track and like the earlier tracks is not that different.
Interesting.
Like, like if I was to look at a track like, track 4 versus track 12 or something like that, maybe track 12 has like 65, 70%. However, like if you, on a normal album on Spotify, if you go and you look, right. Track 12 would have like 10% of the listens of track 1, right? Yeah. And so there's something going on. I feel like people are listening to it as an album, and I'm getting notes from people and they're like, oh my God, this song is hitting me so hard right now because of X, Y, and Z. And they're all mentioning different songs. Like,
isn't that cool?
Like,
that'd be amazing.
So cool. Like I've had people be, telling me, oh, Proximity speaks to me and I'm crying on the train because of it. And that's the second last song, and right. It's like, I feel like you write a batch of songs and you feel pretty good about them. And then the way that those songs get recorded, the way that you articulate them, it really matters. Like it can take a good song and make it great. It can also take a great song and make it bad.
Right.
And I think that this was, for me, it felt like it was ours to fuck up and we managed to not fuck it up. What a miracle. That's it.
Well, it's really interesting that you think of it like that, because I kind of think of it, I mean, again, I wasn't there, but hearing how you describe doing it, it wasn't yours to fuck up because it wasn't there. You guys just kind of put this whole thing into play. Like, and it's just like, it's kind of like the miracle is really that it exists. It wasn't a miracle that you didn't fuck it up. It's a miracle that it exists in a way because you had no intention of doing it. So
I like that. There's also like, a few things. We've got a century of recording experience between us. Right. We've all been doing this for a very long time. There is some sort of deeply ingrained muscle memory and development in our bones as musicians to be able to play music together. Which when you're 18 and you're making a record in your bedroom on a laptop, you're applying all kinds of creativity, but it's a different thing than making music in a room with people that, that takes years to kind of get there.
It does.
So there's a culmination of that. And also, I've written hundreds and hundreds of songs. Many of them are not good. Some of them are good. And it's sort of like a long, slow development and then the lightning quick execution of it at this place. And also, there's an embodiment of love on this record. The four of us, when we're together, I never feel anxious. I never feel like, oh, what am I going to say? Or I never question myself or think about, I don't feel bad about myself or dislike myself when I'm around these people, and that's not been the same with every group of people I've ever been in my life. There's a lot of times you're in a group of people and they could be your best buds in some ways, but like at the same way you're second guessing yourself or whatever. And it's also, to me personally, a bit of a miracle to fall into the hands of these three individuals with whom I feel so relaxed. And we all love each other so much. We just really, really enjoy hanging out. We love playing music together. We appreciate each other. If anything comes up, there's any problems, they get voiced. And I think that there's an inherent kind of sense of trust and deep appreciation between us that I can sort of hear in the record, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. One of the things that struck me that you said is like, well, we've been doing this for so long. as you know, I mean, that is no guarantee of being able to put anything good together, like having a bunch of people that have done it. And so I still think that there is something really special in the way that this album came together for you guys, regardless of how long you've been doing it, regardless of how many songs you went there with or how many ideas you went there with. So, you know, I think it's easy for you to maybe, I'm not saying you're minimized, but to kind of think about it in one way, because you were there, you were in the room, right? But for me to like look at this and look at the way it happened and be like, oh my God, you know, you had shells of songs and you go into a room and you go, and I know you know those guys really well, but you come out with 13 songs. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, it's crazy in 6 days. It's bonkers. And it's not like you went back and recorded them all again. Like you did everything while you were there. You basically wrote them, you fleshed them out. There's a lot of space around them, but you did it all.
And we did add stuff later, you know, like we added strings and woodwinds and some horns and stuff that we just didn't have access to there. You know, there's you know, I probably played a little bit of piano on a couple songs after the fact or whatever, you know, but it was 90%, 95% done. I honestly, like I feel like I'm just like repeating myself. Thank you. I feel like you're gently trying to get me to take more credit for it than I'm willing to take.
No. I'm not. I'll give you the credit. You can take it or not. And no, I'm not trying to. You know, that's up to you. But let's move off of Natural Light for. I have a few more questions about it, but let's move on to something that I am interested in. I'm sure that you've dealt with this before, but I kind of wanted to know, and this is always interesting to me. How does music come into your life to begin with? Like when you were a kid, you know, growing up. Like what brought you to music? Like what were the albums? What was the circumstance? Who brought you to piano? Who brought you to guitar? How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, there was always instruments around. When my parents split up, my mom remarried a guy who had 3 sons who were much older than me and my brother and my sister. And so for a while I was the youngest of 6. And one of those older stepbrothers was living with us for a time, and he was like a PhD guitar player. He was very, very established guitar player, not really in like the, you know, rock scene or anything like that, but just as like an instrumentalist. And so it was almost like his room and board, like to live with his folks again kind of thing, was that he had to teach me and my brother and my sister how to play guitar. And so I remember in the living room, we had this like couple big binders, and there would be like me and Bobby McGee and, you know, The Rose and like all of Beatles songs and Brown Eyed Girl. And, you know, it was just this huge book full of lyrics and chords. And so we would sit around and we would play the songs together, and we kind of learned that's, you know, I can't really read music, but I can, you know, I can pick it up pretty quick. And then I remember like laying on the floor with my headphones on, listening to CDs. For a while, we lived in the country in Ontario, and there was this program where you could order 10 CDs for $1 or something like that.
Yeah, it was what was that called? Something
Columbia House.
Columbia House. That's it. Yeah, exactly.
And so we did that. We ordered, and so 10 CDs would arrive. We, you know, as kids, we had no idea how it worked. Like we would do this without our parents knowing. And then all of a sudden we'd be getting like collections bills like later on. Okay, you have to keep buying CDs now. Yeah. And I remember just sitting there, and I'd flip open the lyric booklet and I'd read every lyric, and I would soak in these songs and like records like Aerosmith, Get a Grip. And I was a lot of Canadian, like CanCon, you know, Canadian stuff, The Tragically Hip, The Grapes of Wrath, Sarah McLachlan, 5440. And I would air guitar, jump around on the couch. My sister and I would do fake radio shows. We had a show called The Bob and Shirley Show.
That's cool.
I was Bob and she was Shirley, and we would use the cassette recorder on the stereo to record our you know, well, what do you think, Bob? I don't know. Here the next song is going to be. And then we would sort of fake DJ, and it was great. It was like, you know, we had 3 channels on the television. Yeah. This is before smart devices were invented, and we had a lot of time to kill, and we just spent a lot of time farting around, listening to music, and sort of, you know, dreaming about music. And if I'm being honest, I think even way back then, when I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, I had these inclinations. I wanted this from a really early age. For a long time, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian. And,
interesting.
very, very good at school when I was in elementary school. And I kind of breezed through. And then like around grade 7, 8, I sort of realized that I didn't want to go into the sciences. And in order to be a veterinarian, I had to be going to science. And I just sort of, from that point on, I was like, okay, it's all music.
Oh, wow.
This is it.
Okay.
And I wrote my first song when I was about 15. But I was always like, through high school, I had so much self-doubt and so much ennui, and malaise and lethargy. And I do remember, like, I wasn't that good at sports. I wasn't that good at snowboarding. I wasn't, like, all the things that my friends were good at, that they got positive affirmation for. I wasn't good at any of that stuff, but I could play guitar, and I could play guitar better than any of my friends. And, I could play Nirvana songs and Pearl Jam songs and Dave Matthews songs and Ben Harper songs. And I got a lot of positive attention for that. And I've got a relative who was going through quite a depression. And it was interesting. Like, he kind of discovered he was a great runner, and now he's like a track star. But I remember talking to his dad when he was a teenager, and he's like, yeah, it just turns out if you can run faster than everyone, you'll feel good, and that's sort of like, within all of our little niches, it's not like life's a competition and you have to outspar people. But if you can find something that gives you joy doing, and then also on top of your own catharsis and joy that you receive from it, other people are like, hey, good job. That's cool. That does a lot for a teenager who's feeling a lot of conflicting internal thoughts.
But, when you're a teenager, doing that takes a certain amount of courage, right? To put yourself out there, especially if you're singing. I don't know if you were just playing guitar at that time, which is a lot easier than singing too. But to put yourself out there, I remember my son started playing guitar when he was, I have pictures of him in diapers trying to strum one of my guitars, and he, like, as soon as he could put his fingers around it, he did. And he was playing open mic nights at like 7. And
wow,
yeah, it was so young, and it was so good. It was like Oasis covers and stuff like that. It was so good, but he has this really high little voice, and one of the kids that was like 13 or 14 made fun of him. He's like, oh, and he stopped singing for like years, and it was just so horrible because it takes the amount of courage it takes to put out there, and then to get made fun of and just squashed by someone that, like, you're kind of looking up to, is really hard.
And singing is such a vulnerable instrument, right? Like, if you're bad at violin or you're bad at guitar, people are pretty forgiving of that. But if you're bad at singing, and that's the thing, is like, there's this special bubble that has to burst of, like, you have to kind of be willing to be vulnerable and put yourself out there. And the more vulnerable you are, it's sort of like the better you have to be. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there's like I don't know, there's a funny thing there. It took me years before I would call myself a songwriter. I'd probably written like 20 songs before I would call myself a songwriter. And same thing with singing. Like, I was not a confident singer. I did not have like a naturally beautiful voice or anything like that. If you hear recordings of me singing in my late teens or early 20s, it's rough. It's raw. It's like, and even like, so the record that kind of changed my life in 2009, it's called Nice, Nice, Very Nice. And there's a song on there called Robots. And that song, like, kind of rose to the top of the charts in Canada in a particular niche. And it just sort of all of a sudden was playing, instead of playing to 80 people, I was playing to 1,000 people, kind of thing. And, when I hear that recording, I can barely stand it because my voice.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't know what. It's so gruff and raw and scratchy. And I guess that's part of maybe the appeal is that it's unique. But since then, I kind of lost my voice through dealing with like TMJ and silent reflux and all these health issues. I had to kind of relearn how to sing and be much kinder to my voice. I'm a much better singer now than I was then. But, like, I think the thing that I had then and the thing that I still have now is I'm willing to be embarrassed. I'm willing to embarrass myself. Even on social media, I'll do stupid stuff on social media, and 2 seconds later be like, why did I do that? I'm going to delete that, But it's like, but you kind of have to be willing to look like an idiot. You can't take yourself so seriously. And it's so tough as a teenager if someone else is like, "Oh yeah, good job, idiot," like good singing. Well, and you were trying your hardest and now they're crushing you. And that's really, really tough.
But even like with social media and things like that, I mean, the rise of the keyboard warrior, right? The guy with the courage behind the anonymous screen. I mean, it's like the Wizard of Oz in our day now. And, it's still, I mean, you're 42. It's got to still, like, someone says, "Nice album, dude. This music sucks." And I don't know if anyone ever says those things to you online or what have you. Like,
sure,
yeah. But it's got to be like,
it's mostly in response because I get pretty political online. I'm never shy of my opinions online, and I tend to speak up about particular causes. Most of the critical feedback I get about my music is from people who actually don't listen to it. It's like I'll write something about like, "Oh, this pipeline sucks. We need to move to clean energy or something," and be like, "What do you know? Your music's terrible," or something. It's like, oh, okay,
but that
good one. Yeah, actually, now that you say that, yeah,
that seems a lot easier to take though. And it's like when like it's very transparent as to what it is, as to somebody just I don't know. I mean, it's a brave thing, like you said. It takes.
I've been hurt though. Like I'll tell you this. In 2010. We sold out the Horseshoe Tavern in Toronto, which is a legendary club. Been there for 50, 60 years or something. And like everyone's played at the Horseshoe kind of thing. And we sold it out, 500 tickets. It was packed. It was this incredible night, had the best time. And the next morning, this article comes out in the Globe and Mail, which is a national paper in Canada. And it basically says the indie emperor has no clothes. This guy is full of crap. All of his fans are idiots. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's a bad songwriter. Like, it was like the most vindictive, like ill-intentioned. And I've spoken with that journalist like several times since. That was early in my career. Luckily, I'm still here. I've spoken with him on the phone. I've been interviewed by him several times since. Neither of us have ever mentioned it.
Oh, is that right?
No, we just have chosen to not mention it. But for weeks, I was just like destroyed, just like, because the thing is, he wanted to take the wind out of my sails. And what frustrated me so much in that moment was that it worked. He did take the wind out of my sails and I felt deflated. And I just thought, like, what a mean thing to do. Like, and I've said mean things about other bands at times when I was younger online, and I've regretted it every single time.
Yeah.
Early on, I really was not. I would always get compared to Mumford and Sons, and my kind of breakthrough record came out 6 months before their breakthrough record. It just their breakthrough record happened to be a billion times bigger and massive. Yeah. Sort of like arena folk was born. But I would always get compared to them, and I would always say, "No, I'm doing a different thing," and stuff. And for a couple of years there, just mostly out of jealousy and out of sort of like a spite, I would just crap on Mumford and Sons anytime I had the chance. Like, that band sucks or whatever. And then I got invited to play a festival that they were curating, and so I went to do it. Really good opportunity, and I'm kind of wandering around the fairgrounds in the backstage, and just getting my bearings. And this minivan kind of drives by me, and then goes like, and reverses back, and all four, Mumford and the Sons, all get out of the van and like, "Oh, are you Dan? Oh, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for playing the festival," and blah, 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 blah. Wow. And like, they were going over and above. And afterwards, I was like, "Oh my God, he's like the nicest guys ever." And I called my wife right after. I was like, "I'm such an asshole, crapping all over this band for years, and they don't deserve it." And and it's, their music is different than my music. I think it's like there's a bit of a different North Star at play here. But I'll say this, like, I stood side stage watching them play to like 35,000 people, and the energy coming off the stage and the energy coming back to the stage from the people was pretty incredible. And I think when I started out, like, I really had a disdain for anything that felt like pop music. I was like, that's gross. Like, anything pop is.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten older and I've started to realize, just what a miracle it is and how hard it is to have any kind of career in music, I've started to appreciate more and more and more how hard it is to carry that kind of weight and to be that kind of level of success and to maintain it for any amount of time. I really respect it. And I think I've been humbled so many times by this industry that if someone's a good person and they've lasted, I'm all for you.
Yeah,
like, I don't like, even if I hate your music, or even if I think that your music is garbage, if you're a good person and you've worked hard and you've managed to like have a career, I'm like, way to go, dudes. You did it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I've kind of like had that same sort of trajectory where, when I was young and a little brash, you'd be like, oh, why is anyone going to see them? They suck. Or, and you just have these like blanket statements that are just, first of all, they don't do you any good. They certainly don't do the other band any good, and they don't do the world any good. And so for me, I think about that. I'm like, now I think about it like, okay, that music might not be like, I'm not a huge Taylor Swift fan. And I wasn't a huge Lady Gaga fan when I listened to like that produced music, but you listen to her at a piano alone, I'm just like, oh my God, it's amazing. Like she got this great voice. She's an incredible piano player. Like, why would I be, all down on Lady? She seems like a great person, so kind of the same thing. It's like, I'm just kind of like, it might not be my cup of tea, but
yeah.
So what?
Yeah. We like last minute, we got offered some face value tickets to see Taylor Swift. And it was the second last show of the entire like 3-year Eras tour or whatever here in Vancouver. And my wife was like, I really go. And her niece is a huge Swiftie, and you have to go. And so we went, and I didn't really know her music very well. And I left pretty impressed. Like, I was like, this is amazing. Like 3.5-hour show.
Yeah.
Everyone's freaking out. Her ability to hold like 70,000 people, on every word that you're doing. It's not easy. And anyone who slags her has no idea of like, how she's able to gracefully sort of balance it all. And lots of bangers, man. Endless bangers. Just like, here's a big banger. Here's a big banger. Here's over and over and over again. And again, it's like, this music isn't made for me. I'm not the demo. It doesn't speak to me on like a really high level, but I left going like, yeah, I'm with you, Taylor. Like you go, girl.
Yeah. Right.
I was very, very impressed.
And that's the other thing, like the different kind of exposure that you can get to an artist. Like, like I said, listening to, someone like a Lady Gaga or a Taylor Swift on the radio, it's just not for me, but you go see them, or you see them in a different situation, and you just get this newfound respect. So I've kind of tried to bring that whole idea of other artists sucking out of my, psyche and out of my vocabulary, because it's just not health. I think
it's really cool. Like, that if you can approach it with that sort of childlike wonderment, because kids, when you're like 6, you don't go like, oh, this sucks and that doesn't suck or something. You're just like, cool. Everything's amazing,
Yeah.
And, I've met some really accomplished, incredible, like avant-garde, niche, badass musicians who will get down with like NWA or Taylor Swift or, subversive like 70s experimental sax music all at the same time. Like they don't put a hierarchy on what is art or not art. They're just sort of like, they're able to sort of take the wonderment of each thing as it comes, which is, there's some higher level consciousness.
Yeah,
in there.
no, absolutely. And I think that it's really healthy. I mean, I've tried to, expose myself to a lot more of that especially as I've gotten older, and not be such a one genre type of, listener. Mm-hmm. But, it takes, it just takes time, and it takes some focus, but it's just like, it's the negativity that just doesn't, especially in a world where we have so much of it with the rise of, social media and political media and everything else. There's just so much negativity out there anyways. It just doesn't, it's not helpful.
Why put any more toxicity in the, why piss in the well? We all have to drink from it.
Exactly. So a couple other things that I wanted to talk to you about, like one, you mentioned Robots earlier, and Robots, I know it's probably your most well-known song, maybe. I don't know. Well,
in some ways, yeah. I mean, it was sort of like a career-defining song, when it happened. If you look at statistics or streaming numbers or radio played, no, there's other songs that are sort of wiped out, and it's actually not my most requested song. the most requested song I get by far is a song called Basket from that.
Oh, really? Okay.
This sort of introspective,
Yeah.
long crescendoing, sort of like an old man looking back on their life kind of thing. And so that song has been, and I think it's like the fan favorites are rarely the radio hits because if you're like a true fan of most bands, you're like, no, that song's played out.
Right,
like the ones
song,
that I love, you're gonna go for the deep cuts that are maybe, again, coming back to what we were talking about, like TikTok, it's the deep cuts are the ones you play at the funeral, the ones you play at the wedding. It's rarely like the big poppy sort of numbers.
But the neat thing about Robots to me is not like, again, it wasn't the song itself that, it's a good song. I'm not critical, but what drew me to it was seeing you do it live and having you be drowned out by the crowd. They're essentially singing louder than your PA, right? I mean, to me, that's kind of like, that's like a dream, right? I mean, like every artist wants their song sung back to them louder than they're able to put it out there to them. That's got to be amazing. Even if it's not like your most requested song, or your favorite song or whatever, to have the crowd participate with you in that way with a song that's yours has got to be amazing. Yeah.
And I, particularly in those early days, I kind of felt like the ringmaster, at a circus or a carnival. Like Robots would be the sort of climax of the set, the ending, and I would crowd surf and I'd be shaking a tambourine while I'm crowd surfing. And I would, it got to a point where people were dressing up like robots. Like most shows, there was half a dozen people who came in robot costumes, and I would pull them up on stage and they would dance on stage, and then I'd crowd surf and I would do all kinds of stunts. Like I remember we were playing at South by Southwest or something, and I kind of stomped from table to table to table and got all of the way, jumped onto the top of the bar and grabbed a pint glass and poured myself a beer and then chugged the whole thing while everybody was singing the chorus of Robots, And it was like, it was a little bit theater and a little bit performance art, and a little bit, just sort of folk rock or whatever. But the song took a life of its own.
Yeah.
And it was part of that trajectory, that part of that, really magical sort of time in my life where I was given a career. I kind of had the benefit of the doubt from a lot of angles for a few years there. And I fell out of love with it, I think, eventually, because I started to feel like a monkey. I was like, I had to every show go bigger and bigger and bigger than the last one and try and make this ending. So, and if you're feeling that way, that's fine. But if you're feeling not larger than life, if you're feeling kind of like small, and then you have to sort of act in a particular way, that creates a cognitive dissonance that, drives a little wedge in your psyche. And it's not helpful. And so I stopped playing it for a few years. And then eventually kind of fell back in love with it, through another experience where we were playing at a folk festival, and the festival was running late, and we only got halfway through our set because we were playing last, but there was like a strict power curfew.
Yeah.
So they shut down the PA. So we went out into the crowd and we played it campfire style. And again, like thousands of people singing that song, and we're standing up on a thing, like, basically just, I don't know what I was standing on, a chair or something, like field, and seeing all the kids on the shoulders smiling and singing and clapping. And it was like, oh, okay, this song has re-earned its place for me, and I play it every show, for the most part. And it's just sort of like a signature song. I don't think it's, as you say, I don't even think it's in my top 20 best songs I've ever written. I would say it's like in the span of my catalog, it would rank like 46th best song written. But that's not for me to say what is going to resonate with other people. And if that song is meaningful, whether it's because of nostalgia or something fresh or whatever, I'm mercy of the audience, because I'm just so grateful that they're still kicking around. They're still buying tickets,
Well, the other one that struck me, and maybe like this one more in terms of like your overall catalog and where you'd rank it, but it's one out that was off your first album, which is So Much for Everyone, which kind of took that same thing, but in a quieter way, I thought. And to me, that one really resonated to me. Like I love, like, there's no chorus, there's no, and you talk about this you did like a 3 video series of more or less songwriting series, I think you called it. But you talk about, so much for everyone on there. And that's kind of when I went into a little bit of a deep dive on it. And you just see like videos of you singing. It could be in a field. It can be like, you're just singing that, sitting there with a guitar, and everybody's like, that one to me is a lot more emotional than Robot. And it feels like the connection there is a bit different with the crowd. But I mean, I loved that one too. And it's another, so you've kind of had at least two that have done this for crowds.
Yeah. I mean, crowd involvement's always kind of been important to me. I try to dissolve the pedestal between the stage and the audience. I don't, I've never, like, anytime I've been positioned or introduced in a way that's kind of even remotely like rock starry, I get really squeamish. I feel like I'm able to give the best performance and give the audience the best experience when I feel the most just like myself. And like I want to be the same person on stage that I am off stage. And so getting the audience involved from really early day in my career was sort of a means to creating that connection and that unity. And singing's amazing. I mean, like I'm a pretty secular dude. But I grew up going to church, and my mom was a minister. And I remember when I was about 12, I was like, do this anymore. And to her credit, she said, fine. But the things that I loved about church was inclusivity. Everyone was welcome. There's like all sorts of like fairly strange people from the community who had community at the church because that's where they knew that they would be accepted. Probably, this is in the 90s, but like by today's standards would be like, neuroatypical kind of folks.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, well, that's cool. Like, clearly these people don't have a lot of friends, but they can come to church and they feel like they're part of something. That was cool. The other thing I loved was singing with people, and Christmas Eve, hold a candle, silent night, choral kind of vibe. There's something really magical about that. And I'm not here for the patriarchy and the dogma and the shame and the guilt, but I am here for the unity. And so I like to feel like you should leave a show exhilarated. You should leave a show feeling like full of life and love and appreciation for all of your existence. And if I can, the church does not own the feeling of community. That's, I think that many churches would claim that they do, or that that's God or whatever, but to me, it's not God. It's just the interconnected, call it whatever you want. And so I like to reclaim that feeling. I like to reclaim the idea that like we can be together, we can feel like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And the best way to get people out of their inhibitions is to force them to sing. Yeah. And so over the years, I've gotten really good at, getting people to sing. And people who normally would be like, oh no, I can't sing. If you get those people singing, like the smile on their face after when they had a positive experience singing and they felt free and alive in the moment. Like,
yeah, that's really cool. Before you mentioned a little bit about what it means to be successful. I mean, for you've had a long career, and you're only 42. That's not old. What
by my kids' standards, it's ancient.
You're super old. I mean, for I don't know how old your kids are, but for anyone that's a teenager or younger, you're freaking ancient. Mm-hmm. But to me, I'm in my 50s, so you're a kid. You're young.
I'm just a baby. I'm just a young guy.
So, how do you define success now? I mean, like what's success for you? Because, like you said, you haven't had like you did have the hit in Canada with Robots, but you haven't had something that's like a Mumford and Sons type of thing where you have 70,000 people screaming your name. But that's not success, right? So it's a version of it. But
that is a kind of success.
It is a kind of success, but that's not the definition. That's not the only definition.
One thing I know is that if I had some kind of rocket ship success out of a song that I didn't like, or I thought was cheap, or I thought was sort of like some watered down thing, I don't know if I would be able to handle the dissonance of looking out at a crowd and going, "You like this?"
I do. Yeah.
And so I feel like there's a couple different topics here, a few different lanes. One is like just pure success, and like, in the classic sense, in terms of like how many people are listening to you, how many tickets can you sell, are you making money doing this? And there's a business element to music. I would, if I could play to the size of crowd that I can play in like a major Canadian city, anywhere in the world, anywhere in the Western world, let's say. I mean, cracking Asia, it sounds pretty ambitious, but like, if I was to play in Cincinnati to 1,500 people or something, like, to me, that's like a perfect career. That kind of like Wilco career,
Right.
maybe Wilco's even a little bit bigger than that, but like, that idea of being able to play to like 1,000 or 2,000 people in most major cities, to me, that's the gem.
Yeah.
That's sort of like, okay, that's a perfect career. You're probably making really good money. You're probably having a really great lifestyle, creative freedom, and yet you can buy your own groceries. You're never getting followed around by paparazzi.
Right.
You're not a
Right.
celebrity in that like crazy sense. Sure, Jeff Tweedy can still go to a corner store and nobody bugs him.
Yeah. Very few people. People who know will bug him, but not too many.
Yeah, and if they do know him, they'll probably be really respectful.
Exactly.
And they'll probably see him around the neighborhood and they're like, oh, that's just Jeff.
Yeah.
The Bieber thing, or like Justin Timberlake, or Lizzo or something, like, to me, that's just, I would not want that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't sound good to me. I also don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be a pop icon. That's not a game that I know how to play. But
well, I would argue that nobody really knows how to play it. You get thrust into it, and you have to.
Yeah.
Play it. I mean, but you
probably learn on the fly.
Yeah, you'd learn if you had to, maybe, or maybe it'd make you miserable, like you said, and you'd be more like Kurt Cobain. And I don't mean with the suicide, but he was famously miserable with fame.
Of course, and it's very isolating, right? It's like, and all of a sudden, everybody wants a piece of you, and you start to question everybody's intentions because you think that they're just trying to get it because they want some of your glory or whatever.
Yep.
Anyways, so that's like the business side of things. On the sort of like art side of things, I will say I have never felt success like I have felt success in Natural Light. I remember, you work on it, you're editing, you're tweaking, you get to the mixing stage and you mixing all the songs and you're listening to different bounces and different takes and all the blah, blah, blah. And you get to and then you're mastering, you listen. And like, by the time you finished your master, you've heard these songs thousands and thousands of times.
Sick of them.
You just spent endless hours with it. And so there was a period after we finished the master where I was like, I'm not listening to that for at least a month. Like I put it away, And then I was in a rental car on tour, not with the band, I was on my own. And I remember going, like, after a month or two had passed, I was like, I'm going to listen to this. And I put it on and I had a beautiful drive through the countryside and I was just cranking Natural Light. And I felt elation. Like I was just so lost in it. And I was like, I can't believe that I got to be a part of this. I can't believe that these are my songs. Like how could, and I made a video and I sent it to the band. And I remember talking about like, there's a time in my life where a Pitchfork review would have meant everything to me. Oh my God, to be accepted by the cool kids at Pitchfork or whatever. And I felt in that moment like I had achieved a thing artistically where there was no external validation that could make me feel any better than I was feeling. Pitchfork could review it or not. It could get played on the radio or not. That like, I know what this album is and nobody can tell me that it's not that thing or that it is that thing because it's like a deep guttural thing. Again, it's not super cool to like talk about your own work. Like it's amazing, but I had that experience of listening to it after some time away and the sort of, I don't know how you even say it, that word like frisson or frisson or like the French word of like kind of getting chills, from like something happening musically. I feel like in that feeling, in that car, in that moment was a level of artistic success and affirmation that nobody else can give me. And that felt great because, I have an ego. I like hearing nice things about my record. I like it when you talk about it and you say that it's great or, obviously that feels good. Of
course.
But I don't, I feel like this album scratched an itch I've had my whole life. So I honestly don't even know what the next stage is. I've written one song in the last year since making that, it's been so busy working on it. And just honestly, it almost felt like writing new songs would be cheating on these songs. It was like, I didn't feel compelled to, and I'm not in any rush. And I don't know. I'm kind of working on a novel, and I'm kind of working on a few things. I feel like I've made 7 records. I do not feel compelled to just make more songs or make more music because that's what I'm supposed to do. I would love the creative freedom and the financial freedom to not have to do, much of anything one way or another, but I'm not in a place like that. But I don't know. Like I just, I feel like I did it. I feel like I climbed the mountain. I got to Mount Everest.
And again, I'm going to try to keep these next questions a little brief because we're at the hour mark and I don't want to keep you too long. I want to be respectful of, your family and your time. But I was listening to your albums and trying to figure out, like, I always listen for like a career arc, or is there an intention, or what's going on with you in terms of like, and I couldn't really do it. I tried, the way that I started with it was a little bit nerdy, but I tried it with like a sine or a cosine wave. Like it kind of felt like, is there this like sort of like, musically, like you get bigger and then you get smaller and then you kind of come back to, but I couldn't really figure it out. But how would you describe that sort of career arc through your albums, if any? Or are you just making like kind of whatever feels good to you at the time and however it goes, it goes? I mean, if you think back.
I've had 2 careers. Like there's an act 1 and an act 2. Act 1 was being young, taking any gig I could, a lot of DIY, tromping around Europe with a train pass and playing in cafes, playing thousands of shows. And then having that burst, it was sort of like making nice, very nice. And it sort of felt like there was a tipping point there. And then the next record I made won a bunch of Juno Awards, which is sort of like Canadian Grammys. And that's when we started really getting played on the radio. And I was so burnt out. My wife was pregnant with our first son. It's 2012. And I remember saying to my manager, like, okay, I need some time off. I've been playing 200 shows a year for 6-7 years. I'm so burnt out. I need to lay low. We're going to have a kid. I want to be a good dad. I want to be here. And so that's when I started getting into, scoring music for TV and film, which I've done a bunch of. And I just sort of like put my head in the sand a little bit. I just like took my foot off the gas. And because I'd grown so accustomed of getting the benefit of the doubt during those years when everything was going my way, I presumed that I could sort of turn the tap back on any old time and it would flow at the same intensity.
Everybody's ready for Dan to come back.
That's right. And it was not that way. And I remember a few years passed and we made a record that I'm so proud of called Club Meds that I was sure we would be like on tour with Radiohead in no time kind of thing. Like, just wait till you hear this record. And I'm so proud of that record. Creatively, it was a success. I got some incredible reviews, but it was, from an industry perspective, it was a huge flop. And ticket sales were down, radio was down, everything was down. It was not a victory like we had previously experienced. And that was for the first time. That was like a seriously humbling, oh shit, And the phone wasn't ringing. Can we play some more festivals? I need some money. No, festivals aren't interested right now. Can we do another tour? Well, the promoters are losing confidence in you because of X, Y, and Z. What would really, really help is if we could, come out strong with something on the radio or whatever.
Wow.
And so I put out an EP that had a song called Race to the Bottom, which actually did really well on Canadian radio. And that was sort of like okay. So anyways, there was this like kind of peak climax and then like, oh God. And then Act 2, 2.0 of my career kind of started in those soul searching, existential questioning everything years around 2015, 2016, 2017. 2018, more or less came out. And that was sort of the beginning of me having another career.
Yeah.
What a miracle. So it sort of resurrected things in a way, and it wasn't going back to old roots. It was sort of a new chapter, new sound, new vibe, and it worked. It sort of, started to rally the base a little bit, and the industry started to take notice again. And in a way, so now I'm a few records past that now. We're deep into Act 2, and I'm happy to say that, my career has never been stronger in many ways. And that's really exciting, at 42 to be in that place. But I have felt the depths of the sorrows and the existential quandary of trying to make a life in music and not feeling like it's working.
Did you think about quitting?
Oh yeah. Oh, for sure I did. Yeah. Many, many, many times I was like, should I just go get a real job?
Yeah.
I'm like a decently capable human being. I'm sure I could get a job, I just, I remember 2015 was the hardest year of my life in so many ways. And January 1st, 2016, I remember going for a walk, getting a coffee, and the sun shining, the natural light on my face. And I just remember going like, okay, I think I can do this. I think I can do this. I can, and started writing music that would eventually go on more or less in 2018. And, it's, there's a lot of people who have been with me since the very get-go. And I get messages every day from people who are discovering me yesterday. So, I'm just thankful for it all. I'm trying to just keep my gratitude level at 10, because what I've learned is that is the superpower to being content and happy, is just to, you get a song added to a cool Spotify playlist. Amazing.
Yeah.
You see a cool butterfly on the walk home. Amazing. Like, I'm trying to get Pat down to that bewilderment, wonderment place. I want to be like one of those really cute old men, like one of those like really cute old guys that you want to be around, because he's just like a burst of sunshine,
happy
all the
and
time,
funny and fun to be around. And it sounds like your kids are maybe keeping you a little grounded in that way too, like just like that wonderment and seeing that world through their eyes a bit.
I think it's so, like, I don't think everybody should have kids.
No, I don't either.
But I don't want to be a gatekeeper parent like that. However, I will say, if you do not have kids and you're kind of in, your 30s, 40s, 50s, it's a really good idea to stay in relationship with young people, whether that's through mentorship or teaching or volunteering or whatever. Staying in relationship with young people, I think, is a really, really healthy thing to do. You don't want to be one of those old folks that just feels totally disconnected from the new generation and is spiteful and presumes that they don't know anything. And you have to look at young people in a round lens. You can't just see them as like one flat thing, like, oh, they're all on their phones or whatever. By the way, who's on their phones more than anyone is boomers, right?
Yeah, I know.
So it's like the kids help for sure. And the kids helped me start writing about love. I was never a love song guy when I was young.
Yeah.
It was not my thing. Now, almost every song I write is kind of a love song, even if it's political or even if it's whatever. There's an element of a lot of it that sort of leans.
Yeah, I had a bunch to talk to you about the love songs and like how you've blended political and love and stuff like that. It's like,
this record is, I think the label called it campfire songs for a world on fire, but also, love songs for a society in decline.
That's great. Actually, that's a really nice, that could have been a good title.
I wish that I thought of that. Yeah. But, I really think that is the heart of this. This isn't the first time I've said this, but like, the thesis of this record is everything's fucked, but I love you.
Right.
And, and it plays through there's a lot of my life in these songs. There's a lot of my personal life in these songs. The song Proximity, I say, will I ever be Joni? Will you ever be Meryl? I'm a songwriter. Will I ever be Joni Mitchell? My wife's an actor. Will she ever be Meryl Streep?
Sure.
There's a lot of my direct life in these songs. And I just, the kids help you open up those sort of like parts of yourself that you think are off limits because you think they're uncool. And then when you get older, you realize there's literally nothing cooler than love.
Well, you also had a little bit of success, I think, doing that. I mean, we talk about getting smacked down and what the ramifications are of it. So I saw you talk about, the first love song that you wrote and stuff like that. And it happened to be a really good song. If that was the worst song you ever wrote and people were like, my God, what's he doing writing about this kind of stuff? It might have changed your trajectory a little bit, but you were lucky and skillful enough to write a good, first love song, if you will. And
thanks.
I think that's helpful too.
I mean, you do anything 1,000 times, you're going to get better at it, right? You're going to hit your head against the wall. I've written a lot of garbage songs. I've written some songs that I think are truly touching something, some kind of truth, some nuance, and a lot of stuff in between. And I'm pretty pragmatic about it. I know when I'm good. I know when I'm great. Right. I know when I'm bad. And just try to approach it with humility and
that self-awareness is awesome. Dan, thank you so much. I've kept you for over an hour now, and I really appreciate your time. It was awesome to talk to you. It was awesome to meet you. I wish you all the success touring this new album and getting it played. It's really, really good, and I love the story about how it came about too. It's just all around a good story. Yeah, I love it.
Well, thank you so much for giving the album heat and listening, and really a pleasure chatting with you.
You as well. Thank you.
Packing father, tin can shooter, makes us ready. He lies in waiting, and I hope we find it before they find it. So I tell stories, make my friends tick. They like me for it. So bring on the papers, 'cause we're ready for what makes us ready.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dan Mangan. He, like I said in the intro, has done quite a bit and is probably emblematic of one of the reasons that I do this show, to shine light on underknown musicians that should not be underknown. I mean, Dan is a 2-time Juno Award winner, which is a big deal in Canada. Multiple Polaris Prize nominations. He's played at a bunch of festivals. He's appeared on Late Night with David Letterman. Like I said in the intro, Dave Grohl offered to play drums on one of his songs. He's opened for the Walkmen. He's opened for the Lumineers. He's toured with the Decemberists. Mumford & Sons picked him up to play one of their festivals. He's done a lot, and I really appreciate him taking this time to talk with me, to talk with all of you, and I hope you enjoyed it. Right now, I'm going to leave you with a song off of one of his earlier albums called Oh Fortune. It's actually the alternative album of the year that he won for the Juno Awards that I just mentioned. And I'm going to leave you with Rows of Houses. Until next time, I'm Jan Perillo, and thank you for listening to The Underknown.